Hey everybody, Brady, also known as the War Hamster in some crazy parts of the internet, here co-hosting another episode of the Re-Federalist Report. Joining me today, as almost always, is my very good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V. Gibbs.
Crazy parts of the internet, dark corners, huh?
Very, very strange places. Be very careful when you tread into my corner of the internet.
Well, fortunately, my corner is mostly my stuff, douglasvgibbs.com. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. We haven't been able to do a lot of these shows of late between a lot of your deals, my deals, all at the same time. But I think we're back.
We're back in the saddle. We should be on a pretty regular routine, and we want to see if we can make some serious progress in James Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia from 1787.
Yeah, but the only interruption we might have is Constitution Day in September, because that kind of is a busy week, I think, for the both of us.
We'll get there. What day of the week is is Independence Day this year? Do you know?
Yeah, it's on Saturday, and I know this because that is also going to be my last episode on KMET 1490 AM.
Gotcha. So you've got it marked on the calendar.
Oh yeah.
So we've been going through Madison's notes of the Constitution, and the reason we're doing this is, our whole spiel is original intent. And I don't think you can really understand the original intent unless you listen to what the people who wrote the Constitution, what they were debating, what they cared about, what they were afraid of this new government would be, what they wanted it to be or not to be more specific.
And there's this misunderstanding, among people. People seem to think when we say founding fathers and we somehow, we almost deify them, and they're up on this pedestal and they all just got along and they all just were dancing through the daisies. And no. You think the debating is harsh today? That the hammering out of the Constitution was not just where they just sat down, they wrote this beautiful document. I mean, it was months of painstaking debate, disagreements,
vote after
bad
vote.
Ideas. I mean,
vote after vote. You spend an entire day just on one word, and those words matter. And those words really mattered.
And we've seen some votes where they'll vote down something they ultimately agree on later.
Yeah.
Or they vote in something to get rid of later. So once again, that's why this is important, because you get a chance to kind of see firsthand through these notes what was going on and why they changed their minds, why they wound up picking a certain thing. And in some of their language, you even can determine where it came from. What research, what are they looking back in history? What other situations, history of Britain, Greek philosophy, whatever. And so this is very important. And Madison's notes are the best taken of the convention. But even he didn't think his was that great, because then afterwards he read over Jackson's notes and decided to make just a few little corrections and additions. But before and after, Madison's notes turned out to be the best. There were a few others that were taking notes, and some of them, didn't last. They were gone, and their notes stopped at that point. You got Matthew Lyons, who took notes. They just weren't as good. The secretary, Jackson, took notes, but Madison and Jackson, I think, traded notes quite a bit. And like I said, Madison's were positively influenced. Anyway, Robert Yates took notes, but after 6 weeks, he was gone. So his notes, very good notes, stopped at 6 weeks. So that's why we're going through Madison's notes. And I've told War Hamster before, and when it came to my education as a constitutionalist, it was Madison's notes that really broke everything wide open for me. That's when I went from understanding the Constitution from an academic point of view to truly being an originalist. And so this journey, I hope, folks, that you've been with us for every episode and you're going to remain with us for all of them. Frequent this show, because this is critical if you want to understand the Constitution from their point of view. People say to me all the time, well, Doug, what you say about the Constitution, that's your opinion. No, my opinion isn't my opinion. It's what the founding fathers said. That's what I have adopted as my opinion. And if you want to understand it, the best way, one of the best ways, aside from reading the ratification notes of the different ratification conventions, is Madison's notes, the actual debates during the convention. Go ahead, sir.
Well, it's interesting. I'm doing a parallel series with Roxanne, Colonel Towner-Watkins, and we're going through the Fabian Society. And we did it for the first couple of weeks of that.
Boy, that's some deep stuff, brother.
Well, we did it. We went back even further. We started talking about the philosophers from John Locke to Rousseau,
right,
everyone like that, that basically you see a contrast of two schools of thought. And I think you can really simplify politics. John Locke, life, liberty, and property. Basically saying, we're all born with God-given natural rights, and the only legitimate purpose of government is to preserve those rights. Anything else where the government starts making decisions opens the door to corruption, which history has proven that to be 100% true.
And then you got Rousseau with the collectivism, the secular system, and really probably one of the greatest influences on what became the French Revolution, which in many ways we could say was the first communist revolution in many ways. So that thought was around back then too.
Yeah, and that's really what they're debating here. They're trying to avoid, having a government make decisions for you, because if any single individual has their natural rights taken away from them, we all lose our natural rights, because it's a slippery slope, and it's got to stop at zero. Once you get to first base, it never stops circling.
Right.
Let's see. Where were we last time we spoke? We were. Well, I guess I should just share my screen. Bear with me one moment. Okay, we were listening to a gentleman by the name of Pinckney from South Carolina making a very long speech.
And youngster.
Oops. Where's my screen share?
I like Pinckney because even though I don't agree with a lot of what he says, he's got fire.
He does. And so we're here on Monday, June 25th, 1787. And Pinckney stopped right about here where it says, talk about and be the means of preserving the equality of condition which so eminently distinguishes us. So I'm going to try to get through the rest of Pinckney's speech here real quick.
Okay.
Feel free to interrupt if you have anything remotely interesting to say.
Okay.
The debate really is, they're really just, they're talking about a lot of important principles behind the drafting of this Constitution. They're going through proposal by proposal and really hammering it, into every detail.
Well, and a lot of this is not falling into the pitfalls of the past. You got to remember these men consider themselves Englishmen, and in England, in their history, you've got this nobility and you've got subjects, and they don't believe anybody should be a subject. They should be citizens. They should be active participants, and they should be treated, going from the idea of the law and Lady Justice, the blindfold, all of those other things don't matter. What does the law say? What does the system say in the sense of us as equal participants in the system? This is really what they're trying to achieve, and this is what Pinckney is trying to address.
Yeah, and he's going to start with the concept of equality, and it's such an important distinction.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is worth bringing up. In Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, he cites, Thomas Jefferson's famous line, "We are all endowed by our Creator." The belief that all men are created equal, but he stops there, and he created this idea that equality is the end goal. But the rest of the sentence has to do with God-given natural rights, which is the more important part of that sentence. And so, it's the whole concept of equality of opportunity versus equality of outcomes.
Right.
And it's a fundamental difference between individualism versus collectivism.
And when it comes to our rights and when we're born, and I used to explain this in my classes, God didn't, say, well, Doug, you get all the rights, and Virginia, you get all the rights. Brady, I don't know, you're going to be a problem. You're only getting half of them. That's not how it operated. We're all endowed with all of the rights, and regardless of our station in life, whether you were a slave, you're in poverty, you're wealthy, of a wealthy family, God's given rights are equally distributed to everyone. What do you do with them is up to you. but we all have those rights. We all have, and as the old joke goes, babies don't understand anything other than that they're babies, and they're all equal. They're all starting from the same point, zero.
Tabula rasa, John Locke.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into it. Mr. Pinckney continues. He says, if equality is, as I contend, the leading feature of the United States, where then are the riches and wealth whose representation and protection is the peculiar province of this permanent body? Are they in the hands of the few who may be called rich, in the possession of less than 100 citizens? Certainly not. They are in the great body of the people, among whom there are no men of wealth and very few of real poverty. Is it probable that a change will be created and that a new order of men will arise? If under the British government for a century no such change was probable, I think it may be fairly concluded it will not take place, while even the semblance of republicanism remains. I like that, everything he said there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he exposes something that's very interesting. America has already developed a middle class. Very few in real poverty. Very, very few could be called rich. Now, and also that is a matter of standard or a way you look at things. There's an awful lot of landowners in America. Trust me, they are rich compared to their components in Europe. But what we see here is an admittance that at this point there is this middle class that's beginning to develop, and that's one of the things that really set America apart from the rest of the world. Is this idea that there aren't just two classes, the wealthy and the impoverished, who basically serve the wealthy. This middle class that is forming, this midpoint where you can do quite well, you can take care of yourself quite well. You still have the opportunity to do better, greater. You have the opportunity to mess it up. And this is something that is attests to the greatness of the American system, and it was already developing at this point.
Yeah, as long as you can afford a musket, you can feed yourself.
There is that.
How is this change to be effected? Where are the sources from whence it is to flow? From the landed interest? No, that is too unproductive and too much divided in most of the states. From the moneyed interests? Talking about bankers. If such exist at present, little is to be apprehended from that source. And it's interesting he says that because we do have a couple of really wealthy men in the room. Robert Morris, for one. He was a British banker and the wealthiest man in the colonies at the time. Is it to spring from commerce? I believe it would be the first instance in which a nobility sprang from merchants. So I'm going to disagree with that because of the mercantilist system. Basically, the British nobility got replaced by the merchants, but I digress. Besides, sir, I apprehend that on this point the policy of the United States has been much mistaken. We have unwisely considered ourselves as the inhabitants of an old instead of a new country. We have adopted the maxims of a state full of people and manufactures and established in credit. We have deserted our true interest, and instead of applying closely to those improvements in domestic policy which would have ensured the future importance of our commerce, we have rashly and prematurely engaged in schemes as extensive as they are imprudent. This, however, is an error which daily corrects itself, and I have no doubt that a few more severe trials will convince us that very different commercial principles ought to govern the conduct of these states.
Out with the old, in with the new.
It was really talking about, they're living under the Articles of Confederation at the time, and with the lack of a central government has allowed the states to commit commercial warfare against each other. And you do have price gouging and things like that, and really bad protective tariffs. And I think that's what he's referring to here. We need a better system.
Well, and everybody in this convention understood that what they were engaging in was a very a tightrope walk. You want bigger government, but you don't want bigger government. You've got to find that balance where it's big enough to handle the things it needs to handle, but yet it is restrained enough that it is not a danger to the people. The way I like to put it is what what they had with the Articles of Confederation was a lamb. What they needed was a lion that you could unleash when needed to be unleashed, but was caged when it needed to be caged. The latter being domestically. And this is a tightrope walk. How do you do this? Because if you create a lion, even though it's in a cage, the potential of it being uncaged at the wrong time is always there. You've got to put enough checks and balances, enough restraints on it. But if you have no lion, then you fail. And I think sometimes we look at different presidents too, and we think about this and the tightrope they have to walk. You want a firm, strong-minded president who's willing to be the lion in trade, the lion in warfare and whatnot, but they can't be a lion when it comes to issues that should belong to the states. They then need to be caged, and this is what they're trying to achieve, but they haven't figured out exactly how to do it yet. And even though those who want a bigger government, the nationalists, realize that the states would never accept anything that was too big. But everybody also knew that the Articles of Confederation, where there was not enough government, was a failure. And so this is a like I said, a tightrope dance that they all recognize exists.
And what Doug just said really explains the issue we have with Hamilton. He wanted a bigger government so they could do federally funded internal improvements and protective tariffs. The Articles of Confederation never would have allowed for that. The government had no teeth, had no money. Right. So even though he proposed a much bigger government here at the convention, he didn't get his way at all. He was voted down on almost everything he proposed. But they did come up with something was a bigger government, a version of a lion that he thought he could guide and put the chain and be the one in control of the chains. And that's why he argued so vociferously in the Federalist paper, saying, no, it's not going to do that. No, the government would never get out of control. And then he turned around and he's the one who let the government off the leash. So
right.
That really is one of the shortest versions of what our issue is with Hamilton is right there, what Doug just said. All right, he continues. This is a really important paragraph. The people of this country are not only very different from the inhabitants of any state we are acquainted with in the modern world. We are different. Americans are unique, he's saying.
And the development of this country is very different than the development of every country, might I add. And as we spread across the frontier, that difference, that gap widened.
Indeed. He says, but I assert that their situation is distinct from either the people of Greece or Rome, or of any state we are acquainted with among the ancients. Can the orders be introduced by the institution of Solon? Can they be found in the United States? Can the military habits and manners of Sparta be resembled to our habits and manners? Are the distinctions of patrician and plebeian known among us? Can the Helvetic or Belgic confederacies, or can the unwieldy, unmeaning body called the Germanic Empire, can they be said to possess either the same or a situation like ours? I apprehend not. They are perfectly different in their distinctions of rank, their constitutions, their manners, and their policy.
And this is not to say that they shouldn't be drawing from ideas from what he mentioned. The idea was draw from what is best, let go of what is not fit for us. And Solon, which he mentions in his little soliloquy there, was a Greek philosopher. And really, he was in many ways one of the proponents of what we call today the rule of law. And he explained that, if you have no law, you don't have liberty. You have to have law to have liberty. And it sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. And when we talk about the law, and Solon talk about the law, what he's talking about is not necessarily just the law, but the rule of law. And this is what Jefferson explains in the Declaration of Independence as being the laws of nature and of nature's God. This is the natural law, the law that goes with the natural order of things. And so I'm happy to see him refer to Solon, but he's saying that Solon alone and what his system was is not for us. It doesn't mean that things that he said or some of the things that he believed are not going to be important components here. but we are so different that we are nothing like those systems as they are. Can we draw from them? Oh, absolutely. But we're nothing like anything that's ever existed. We've developed in a way that they never really developed.
And we see this argument played out even today between the globalists who want their one world government to have this all blend in this, one giant. No, Americans, we are unique. We have a different past, a different history. We have a different nature.
And that's where the term American exceptionalism comes from. People want to misread what that means. American exceptionalism doesn't mean we're so exceptional we're better than everybody else, as the Democrats and certain groups out there like to point out that they think it means. Exceptional means we're an exception to the rule. We're unique. We're different. That's what American exceptionalism is.
And this very much applies to the whole concept of immigration. Not everybody is meant to be able to function in a society that is supposed to prioritize individual rights and liberties. Most other cultures are very collectivist by definition, and they haven't evolved past that. And it's
right.
It's not saying we're superior; we're just different.
And it works.
Works better than any other nation in history, despite all the flaws and all the people that threw wrenches into the gears.
It's well put.
Our true situation appears to me to be this: a new extensive country containing within itself the materials for forming a government capable of extending to all its citizens all the blessings of civil and religious liberty, capable of making them happy at home. This is the great end of the Republican establishments. We mistake the object of our government if we hope or wish that it is to make us respectable abroad. Conquest or authority among other powers is not, or ought not, ever to be the object of Republican systems. Amen to that. If they are sufficiently active and energetic to rescue us from contempt and preserve our domestic happiness and security, it is all we can expect from them. It is more than almost any other government ensures to its citizens. This is the best paragraph of this entire. We've read.
Yeah, and it really speaks to an idea they had where they believed America would be a great empire, but not a great empire because of conquest or superiority, but because of emulation. That the American liberty and the American free market system would be so great, do so well that every other country would want to emulate it, and that some areas may even want to go, hey, can we be a state? This was a lot of the belief of a lot of the founding fathers, not necessarily all of them, but a lot of them. And so you will even see Benjamin Franklin use the word empire, and they don't mean empirical in the sense of conquest, but in the sense of a great nation that will be emulated around the world. They saw that what they were creating was something that the rest of the world would want.
Yeah, and they've got some really good historical examples. In the 1600s, you had the Dutch Empire was the most powerful economy in the world. And basically, like you said, was the freest economy. The Dutch Republic was something to be emulated. Now, of course, it got corrupted after a very short period of time. They didn't have the population to sustain that type of influence. And then the British Empire inherited that. And of course, that got corrupted by the mercantilists. And this is what they're saying. That we fought a war to get away from this mercantilist crony capitalist system. But we're going to do it right because we're a different people. We're different. We understand the values of the Enlightenment and life, liberty, and property. And these are natural rights.
And you repeated a line on X recently that I like to use, and I think it's apt, it could be aptly used here as well, is we have to be reminded it's like being on a raft on the Niagara River. The roar of the falls is in the distance. You're heading for those falls. Everybody's rowing in the opposite direction to keep from going over the falls. The going over the falls is not inevitable, but the current on the boat, that's all it's there for. So push you towards the falls. So that current being those attacks, that corruption that happened to the Dutch system, the corruption that happened to the British, that's always there. Those men, those ideas, those attacks are always there. It is a current that never goes away. You try to create a system that can best withstand that current, and that can even emerge beyond it and above it, but it will always be there. The attempts to corrupt something, no matter how good it is always there. So creating a constitution, creating a system is not good enough. The maintenance of it and good men being willing to do something to kind of give a nod to a famous saying by Edmund Burke is important. And I think, I think our young man here from South Carolina understands that enough that that's what he's talking about, and what he's saying is very good. Unfortunately, Pinckney is not the most, for lack of a better way of saying it, most Jeffersonian minded person you'll come across at the convention. If anything, he's far from it, but he grasped what's going on here, and he's putting out some important information here. And I do think that what he's saying here does help shape some of the convention as it moves forward.
All right, let's continue. Well said, Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you.
I believe this observation will be found generally true, that no two people are so exactly alike in their situation or circumstances as to admit the exercise of the same government with equal benefit. That a system must be suited to the habits and genius of the people it is to govern and must grow out of them.
For our audience, explain your
Equal outcomes versus equal rights. That's what he's referring to.
Right. Equity versus equality, Jeffersonian equality versus modern equity. That's what he's talking about.
The people of the United States may be divided into three classes. Professional men who must, from their particular pursuits, always have a constitutional weight in the government while it remains popular. Commercial men who may or may not have weight as a wise or injudicious commercial policy is pursued. If that commercial policy is pursued, which I conceive to be the true one, the merchants of this country will not or ought not, for a considerable time, to have much weight in the political scale. He's talking about money in politics, people.
He's also talking about crony capitalism, or what we call that today anyway.
Yeah, I'm wondering if he's looking sideways at Alexander Hamilton when he's saying this.
One wonders, and that's a great observation. Continue, please.
The third is the landed interest, the owners and cultivators of soil, who are and ought ever to be the governing spring in the system.
Now, let's stop here for a second.
Yeah, I need to jump in on this too. So go ahead.
All right, go ahead. No, you go ahead, and then I'll give my thought.
Well, this comes back to Carroll Quigley when he talks about the difference between the agrarian empires versus maritime empires. And the real distinction he makes is the maritime empire is going to be much less stable, but also the volatility goes both the upside and the downside. You can make a lot of money with international trade, but it also brings in a lot of intrigues. The agrarian system is much more stable. This is the actual political divide going on in America that would eventually lead to the quote-unquote Civil War. The South was an agrarian society. The Northeast, Eastern Seaboard were maritime. And there is a really big distinction. Pinckney from South Carolina is making it very clear that the owners and cultivators of the soil are the governing system. We're the stable ones.
Now, and now that said, this now ties into something you've heard me say a million times, is they understood that the rural voice needed to be a part of the system because, as you're stating, that's the stable one. That's the one that's never going to change. That's the one that's always going to look at government in a manner of stay out of my business, stay limited. I've got this. Let my local interests take care of my local interests. And so this is one of the reasons why our system, our republic, was designed the way it was to make sure that that minority voice, that agrarian voice, that rural voice had a voice. That was the whole purpose of the U.S. Senate, the way it was designed, the state Senates, the way they were originally designed, which was destroyed by the 17th Amendment and Reynolds v. Sims. This was the reason why in Federalist Paper number 10, Madison gets into how, you got these different factions, and the way to control the factions and make sure none of them take over is just set them against each other. And what he meant by that was make sure that that agrarian voice, this third group that Pinckney's talking about here, has a voice, a strong voice, because they're the stable ones. They're the ones that are not going to be heading off into a collectivistic, we got to get control of the system type of attitude. And they're going to be the stabilizers of the system. and therefore their voice has to be there. And this idea that he just said here, this dominates this convention. This idea that the minority voice has to have a voice, that we need a republic, not democracy, where the powerful voices, the more populated voices, control everything.
I in prepping for one of our Fabian shows last week, I asked my AI agent to summarize the modern movement of the 1800s. And I just want to read this paragraph to you because the last sentence really hits on what we both just said. The modern movement of the 1800s does not refer to a single unified campaign, but rather to the broad cultural, intellectual, artistic, and social transformation that defined the rise of modernity during the 19th century, often called the Long Century, roughly 1789 to 1914. So basically 2 years after the Pinckney speech, this starts. And here's the sentence. It encompasses the shift from traditional agrarian religious societies toward industrialized, urban, secular, scientific, and individualistic ones. And it really is the cultural divide that's going on here, is this move towards urban mercantilist systems versus traditional agrarian.
And that traditional agrarian, that is the stabilizing force. The other is fine to have as long as it's being stabilized by the other.
Very good. So continuing. These three classes, however distinct in their pursuits, are individually equal in the political scale and may be easily proved to have but one interest. The dependence of each on the other is mutual. And what we found in America was that the merchant class was depending on the tariffs and taxes from the agrarians, which caused a war. The merchant depends on the planter. Both must in private as well as public affairs be connected with the professional men, who in their turn must in some measure depend upon them. Hence it is clear from this manifest connection and the equality which I before stated exists, and must for the reasons then assigned, continue, that after all there is one, but one great and equal body of citizens composing the inhabitants of this country, among whom there are no distinctions of rank, and very few or none of fortune.
Well said, Mr. Pinckney.
Yes, indeed. I don't think we need to elaborate on that. I mean, it's pretty clear that the vision was not followed, but we know why.
And like I said, Pinckney was not your most Jeffersonian guy there. He wasn't necessarily full board Hamiltonian, but he wasn't necessarily anti-Hamiltonian either. But if anything, he might even be considered kind of a moderate there. He had some Hamiltonian ideas, but he lived in a very, for lack of a better way of putting it, Jeffersonian-minded region. So he kind of, I think, understood both sides quite well. And I think that's what kind of fueled what he had to say here.
For people thus circumstanced, are we then to form a government? And the question is, what kind of government is best suited for them? Again, he's going to be looking at Hamilton.
That's the elephant in the room, brother. That is the elephant in the room. Go ahead.
Will it be the British government? No. Why? Because Great Britain contains three orders of people distinct in their situation, their possessions, and their principles. These orders combine from the great body of the nation, and as in national expenses, the wealth of the whole community must contribute. So ought each component part to be full properly and duly represented? No other combination of power could form this due representation, but the one that exists. Neither the peers or the people could represent the royalty, nor could the royalty and the people form a proper representation to the peers. Each therefore must of necessity be represented by itself or the sign of itself, and this accidental mixture has certainly formed a government admirably well balanced. Basically, he's talking about the nobility, the royalty, and the people in England represented by their parliament. They have the House of Lords, they have the House of Commons, and then you have the crown. And he says it works for them, it doesn't work for us, because we don't have those distinct classes. But the United States contain but one order that can be assimilated to the British nation. This is the order of commons. They will not surely then attempt to form a government consisting of three branches, two of which shall have nothing to represent. They will not have an executive and senate hereditary, because the kings and lords of England are so. The same reasons do not exist, and therefore the same provisions are not necessary. I think it's an important distinction he's making. The reason the British balance has worked is because you did have three different classes of people representing themselves. And that just would never apply here, even though we've tried to create an American oligarchy.
Now, that's not to say that the basic structure of the system wouldn't work. Having a figurehead, two bodies of legislature, they became to understand as this convention continued that while we don't want an aristocracy, you need a class of politicians that are skilled in the science of politics also as a primary voice. If it was nothing but the commons, then what you wind up is a problem that typically accompanies the pitfalls of democracy. And so you want a group of people who are considered skilled in politics. This is where the states become kind of the replacement for the House of Lords. The voice of the states becomes this pseudo aristocracy. We'll get to that as we go further into the convention, but I wanted to bring that up because we did draw some ideas from the British system. We just didn't want to be exactly like them because, as Pinckney so aptly put it, it's not for us.
We don't have kings, we don't have lords.
Mm-hmm.
We must, as has been observed, suit our government to the people it is to direct. These are, I believe, as active, intelligent, and susceptible of good government as any people in the world. The confusion which has produced the present relaxed state is not owing to them. It is owing to the weakness and defects of a government, incapable of combining the various interests it is intended to unite, and destitute of energy. What he's saying right here is exactly why they're, having the convention in Philadelphia. The Articles of Confederation were too weak. It could not do what it needed to do, and basically the number one function of a government is to maintain, preserve our God-given natural rights and to maintain order. It's not working. We need to make it stronger.
But once again, it's a tightrope walk. You want robust, you want energetic, but you don't want so energetic and robust that you wind up with a dictator. But if the leadership is not robust, if it's not energetic, if some of those things are not centralized, then you wind up with the Articles of Confederation, and you wind up with I hate to say it this way, but too many chiefs and not enough Indians. And so, once again, they're seeking balance here. They're trying to find, and what he's talking about at the beginning of this sounds like democracy, but they know democracy is dangerous. So how do you make sure it is a government of the people, to the people it is to direct, yet it's not democracy? Once again, tightrope walk. We're looking for balance here. Go ahead.
All that we have to do then is to distribute the powers of government in such a manner and for such limited periods as, while it gives a proper degree of permanency to the magistrate, will reserve to the people the right of election they will not or ought not frequently to part with. I am of opinion that this may be easily done, and that with some amendments the propositions before the committee will fully answer this end.
I don't know if you remember from the classes, but there's a handful of times where I'd ask class, what was the purpose of the Constitution? And I would get answers all over the place, and none of them would ever be true, the correct answer. The correct answer is what was the purpose of the Constitution? To properly distribute power. That's the answer, and that's what he's talking about here. Go ahead.
And he also makes the a really important point of for such limited periods.
Mm-hmm.
There's not to be a permanent 42 years in the Senate type of situation.
Yeah, despite the fact that Hamilton is standing up and saying, "Wait a second, the president should have a lifetime." No, this is exactly what Pinckney's saying. No, limited, absolutely.
Pinckney goes on to say, "No position appears to me more true than this, that the general government cannot effectually exist without reserving to the states the possession of their local rights."
State sovereignty.
Thank you, Pinckney.
So once again, well, you got to remember, he's from South Carolina. South Carolina is all about state sovereignty. And not just there. I mean, just go throughout the history of the United States. How often is South Carolina the leader of, states' rights? Nullification crisis, war between the states, you name it, South Carolina is right there. But anyway, all right, continue.
Did you know that South Carolina is the fastest growing state right now?
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
On a percentage basis, it's growing faster than Florida and Texas.
Yeah, well, it got a stronger liberty-minded, constitutionally minded kind of, dare I say, conservative base that's stronger than maybe even Florida.
Yeah, unfortunately, their GOP continues to give us some of the worst rhinos in the entire country.
Well, thank Charleston for that.
The Southern
democracy always screws everything up. But anyway, go ahead.
They are the instruments upon which the Union must frequently depend for the support and execution of their powers, however immediately operating upon the people and not upon the states.
Yeah, this what he's saying here when it comes to the states' possession of their local rights is we hear about the separation of powers all the time, and we think, okay, between the three branches. That's not the real true separation of powers. The true separation of powers is between the federal government and the states. Go to Federalist Paper number 45. The powers given to the federal government are few and defined. What remains of the states are numerous and indefinite. Let them handle their own business. None of the federal government's business when it comes to state issues. That's what he's talking about. When you have a government that is intruding, is infiltrating, is sticking its nose into local business, they're going to screw it up. And this separation of powers between the states and the federal government is very important here, and he's laying it out beautifully.
And we're going to see this discussed and debated quite a bit as we go forward.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when it comes to the jurisdiction of the courts. People think that everyone today goes running off to the federal courts every time something doesn't go their way. But what they'll tell us is that these were co-equal. State courts were co-equal to federal courts. They just had different jurisdictions.
Right. Different
issues
to take care of.
And in Virginia, with the gerrymandering case, the Democrats are trying to appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's made it very clear. No, when it comes to redistricting, your state court has the final say. Your state Supreme Court, we don't know. That's not our business. They actually got that right.
Yeah, I was impressed by that. And this is also to understand too that the states at this time, they were all about state sovereignty. And so even if the delegate at the convention didn't agree with state sovereignty the way Pinckney's laying it out, it doesn't matter because the states did. And we've already heard often already, hey, if we do this, will the states be willing to ratify it? The states have a voice, and they're all about sovereignty. So whether the delegate believes in that sovereignty or not, it's got to be a part of the discussion.
Well, that's why we talk about delegated powers. Mm-hmm. States were sovereign in their own rights. They had all the power. They were delegating some authority to the federal government for specific purposes because a central government can do some things better, like handling foreign affairs. Settling interstate disputes, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, well, and understand the federal government is a creation of delegates from the states. The states existed first. They are the ones that were already there. The federal government was not created to dominate the states. It was created to make the situation better, but the states are still the parents here. They're the ones who created this child that has become a Frankenstein monster. But the states are the creators. They came first. They're the ones that are saying, we need help because as a bunch of individuals, we can't make this work. We need something to handle the issues for the union. If it's about the union, protecting the union, preserving the union, promoting the union, job of the federal government. If it's not about the union, it's a local issue, none of their business. Stay in your lane, federal government. We gave you your list of stuff you can do. Stick to it. Do not be a national government. Do not be an overpowering monarchy. Be a helper that handles stuff for the union so that the states can handle their state issues without having to worry about it. That's ultimately what this whole thing is.
Well said. Pinckney concludes, much has been said about the propriety of abolishing the distinction of state governments. and having but one general system.
Now we get back to what you said earlier. Do you think he's giving a sideways look at Hamilton at that point?
And having but one general system. Suffer me for a moment to examine this question. The mode of constituting the second branch being under consideration. Well, I'm going to see what this footnote says real quick. The residue of this speech was not furnished like the above by Mr. Pinckney. Okay, so the residue of Pinckney's speech, according to Robert Yates, was as follows. The United States include a territory of about 1,500 miles in breadth, blah, blah, blah. I might be premature on this. I'll come back to that.
Well, and the next line, I think, on the main body here is important. The word what?
The word national was struck out and United States inserted.
Understand something. And you'll every once in a while I'll accidentally do this, but I almost never use the word nation to refer to the United States. I insert the word country instead. We were not intended to be a nation. I know in general political discourse, the word nation has become synonymous with the word country.
One nation under God.
One nation under God. But the word nation really is a representation of a national system. We don't have a national system. They struck the word national out for a reason. They didn't want a national system. They were not nationalists. Now, hang on. Some of you don't get out of your chair just yet. Nationalist doesn't mean to them what we think it means today. A nationalist is someone who had love of government and wanted an overarching umbrella government to control everything. That was a nationalist. That's what national meant to these guys. We didn't want a nation. We wanted a republic, a country under a republican form of government, not a national form of government. And that's the reason why I wanted to stop him here. And if some of you have to understand something, Warhamster's been hearing this coming out of my mouth for years and years and years. And so I'm kind of get excited when it pops up, and I've been talking about this from day one since he's probably known me. National is not what that, don't get me wrong. The word national in reference to government is sometimes used by some of these people. Once again, because sometimes it's used synonymously with country, but more often than not, you'll hear them say something like general government or the union or something like that. The word national used very sparingly because we were not supposed to be a national system. I cannot say that strong enough.
And that's really the issue we have with Hamilton and then later on Lincoln. Because what Lincoln basically said, okay, states don't have rights. We have a national government run from D.C., even though we got 41% of the popular vote. We're going to take over. And therefore you get war. All right, Mr. Gorham. This is Gorham is Nathaniel Gorham from Massachusetts. We haven't heard a lot from him yet. Not exactly a household name, but he's an interesting gentleman. Inclined to a compromise as to the rule of proportion. He thought there was some weight in the objections of the small states. If Virginia should have 16 votes and Delaware with several other states together 16, those from Virginia would be more likely to unite than the others and would therefore have an undue influence.
Now, well, let me pause you there. Massachusetts has a very interesting angle here. It is a small state and a large state at the same time. Geographically, they're relatively small if you don't count Maine. And Maine felt like it was its own state even at that point. But at the same time, they did have a large population, largely due to Boston. So Massachusetts, while they tended to lean in a Hamiltonian direction, they tended to hang with the bigger states. They kind of had an eye on the smaller states. And remember, they got the smaller states right next to them too. So Massachusetts tended to have this idea of listening to what the small states had to say too. You also have to remember something else about Massachusetts. They're the ones where all this stuff started from. They were the crazy ones who started standing against the British. They were the ones where everybody went, whoa, Massachusetts got a problem with the British. And then finally everybody said, oh, wait, it's going to come for us if we don't support Massachusetts. Massachusetts was the fulcrum from which it all began too. And so there's a certain attitude that comes out of Massachusetts as well. So I just wanted to point that out as you listen to Gorham talk.
Yeah, it's a pretty important state. I mean, they've always been massholes. But that being said,
Massholes.
yeah, you bring up Maine. For those who don't know, I'm in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is basically the northeast corner of New Hampshire. But probably a 5-minute walk that direction, I can go over the bridge and I'll be in Maine. Because of that, the internet doesn't realize I'm not in Maine, so I get bombarded with political commercials from Maine, and it's been very entertaining because they've got the Nazi tattoo guy running against Susan Collins in the Senate. I get to hear about it every single day.
You want to talk about trying to figure out who the lesser of two evils are?
It's pretty brutal. All right. This remark was applicable not only to states, but to counties or other districts in the same state. Thank you, Reynolds v. Sims. According to the Constitution of Massachusetts, had provided that the representatives of the larger districts should not be an exact ratio to their numbers. An experience, he thought, had shown the provision to be expedient. He's basically going off. We're leaving Pinckney's entire spiel behind, and he's going back into the bicameral legislature, population-based versus, one per state or one per county. It's one of my, this is a topic Doug and I beat up endlessly when it comes to Reynolds v. Sims and the 17th Amendment. So I don't want to go too deep into that right now, but that's what he's talking about.
Oh, Mr. You don't even know how I'm restraining myself right now, but go ahead.
If you want to hear what Doug and I have to say, go search on my channel for Reynolds v. Sims under Warhamster.
Yeah. Also if we were to launch into it right now, the next 2 shows would be about it. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, it is a show in and of itself, and it's pretty much my mission, political mission in life, is to have Reynolds v. Sims someday get before the Supreme Court again. But we're not going to do it. This is Mr. Reed speaking next. Mr. Reed is from Delaware. It's George Reed. The states have heretofore been, and remember, the small state is Delaware. Also, one of the interesting problem children occasionally.
Well, Delaware has a fascinating history too, if I might add this. And most people don't realize this. We hear about the 13 colonies. Delaware was never a colony. It was the southern counties of Pennsylvania. But they were the first one to be like, we want to be an independent state when the Declaration of Independence came along.
And that had a lot to do with religious liberty.
Yeah, and they were all over the Constitution. Yeah, I think they had the shortest constitutional convention. What do you think? We're good. Let's go. It was almost that quick.
They've been oppressed by the Pennsylvania Quakers for quite some time.
Yeah.
You may think of the Quakers as being these wholesome, people that wear the bow ties and stuff like that, but they were dicks when it came to religious oppression. They could be quite tyrannical.
Yeah. All right, go ahead.
Mr. Reed says the states have heretofore been in a sort of partnership. They ought to adjust their old affairs before they open a new account. He brought into view the appropriation of the common interest in the Western lands. This is a big topic, the Western expansion.
Yeah, and understand at this point, Delaware don't have any Western lands. Maryland does. Connecticut does. The states are just, if you look at a map at this time and shortly after this of the United States, you see some of these states, their territorial border just kind of heading west with nothing in the way. Delaware is one of those states, and you got to realize that, and actually that was before this. I should say this correctly. That was before this. That was one of the reasons why the Articles of Confederation took so long to ratify, is because states like Delaware are like, whoa, and Maryland is another one saying, wait, you've got all these states, got this land out there in Northwest Territory. We don't want a Virginia that goes from coast to coast.
We don't
Take
want
that land, grab it, set it up to be turned into different states in the future, or we're not a part of this. We're done. Delaware and Maryland were the 2 states that had that attitude.
They didn't want a California.
Yeah, but anyway, go ahead.
To the use of the particular states. Let justice be done on this head, and let the fund be applied fairly and equally to the discharge of the general debt. And the smaller states who had been injured would listen then perhaps to those ideas of just representation which had been held out. The issue here this is a really touchy subject, the general debt. The state said they had accumulated an unequal amount of debt to pay for the Revolutionary War. We're still at this point in time, these soldiers are getting paid out of state scrip, which is trading about 5 or 10 cents on the dollar. I'm going to tell the full story later, but I just wanted to bring this up. That is a big issue here.
And meanwhile, Hamilton's saying, "No, we want the federal government to take on all that debt."
Sticking point. I actually told that story about 2 weeks ago with the colonel, and people got a kick out of it, and I got bombarded.
And most people don't realize some of the underlying stories that were going on at this time.
I got bombarded with people who'd never heard the stories about Robert Morris. And anyway, I digress. Mr. Gorham did not see how the convention could interpose in the case. Errors he allowed had been committed on the subject, but Congress were now using their endeavors to rectify them. The best remedy would be such a government as would have vigor enough to do justice throughout. Stronger government. This was certainly the best chance that could be afforded to the smaller states. Sure, accept our authority. We'll be fair to you.
Well, he's using we're stronger with unity, but someone's got to be in charge. Well, the stronger with unity might be correct, but hand it over to the big states to let them just control everything. But then at the same time, you don't want to just hand everything over to the small states or have no influences from states that have large. So once again, balancing act, tightrope. We're trying to figure out how to take good ideas, bad ideas, and make them all good and blend them into a system that distributes power in such a way that everybody's benefiting.
Next to speak will be Mr. James Wilson of Pennsylvania, big state.
Oh, and let me say this real quick. James Wilson is one of my favorite love-hate relationships. I love the guy. He has so many great quotes. He was so good at defending the Constitution at the Pennsylvania Convention. But the guy really had a real true Hamiltonian streak at the same time. And so it's hard to totally love the guy. So but he is one of, in my opinion, one of the brighter members of the convention, even though sometimes he goes off in directions that I don't know if I can agree with. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, at some point during this exercise, I think we really ought to read his State House speech, the State Yard speech, whatever. It's some of the best oratory we ever heard from that time period.
Oh, yeah. And like I said, most of what the guy said, I mean, I've got quote after quote after quote that I have saved from Wilson that I absolutely love. Be aware also that Wilson was the founding father who had a quote that even talked about abortion. So for those of you who say, well, the founding fathers didn't even think about that issue. Actually, they did. Wilson has a quote where he talks about the importance of a life that's still in the womb. But of course, he was also a young Earth advocate. Before young Earth was an issue, he in that exact same speech, he says, in the 6,000 years that we have been on this Earth. But anyway, but Wilson, like I said, he's one of my favorites, even though sometimes I want to just strangle him. So go ahead.
Let's see what he has to say. He says, the question is, shall the members of the second branch be chosen by the legislatures of the states? We're getting back into that again.
Right.
When he considered the amazing extent of country, the immense population which is to fill it, the influence which the government we are to form will have, not only on the present generation of our people and their multiplied posterity, but on the whole globe, he was lost in the magnitude of the object.
Once again, these founding fathers believed America would be an empire, not an empire of conquest, an empire of emulation, of influence.
The project of Henry IV and his statesmen was but the picture in miniature of the great portrait to be exhibited. He really is a great orator. His colorful language, there's good analogies. He was opposed to an election by the state legislatures. In explaining his reasons, it was necessary to observe the twofold relations in which the people would stand. One, as citizens of the general government, and two, as citizens of their particular state. That's what Doug was saying about the general government. That's what we call the federal government today.
Mm-hmm.
The general government was meant for them in a first capacity, the state governments in the second. Both governments were derived from the people, both meant for the people. Both therefore ought to be regulated on the same principles. So he's basically arguing for democracy. The same train of ideas which belong to the relation of the citizens of their state governments were applicable to their relation with the general government. And in forming the latter, we ought to proceed by abstracting as much as possible from the idea of state governments.
Now, while democracy may be bleeding at the edges of what he's saying, he don't dare say it because everybody hated democracy. Continue.
He's saying everything but.
Yeah.
With respect to the province and objects of the general government, they should be considered as having no existence. The election of the second branch by the legislatures will introduce and cherish local interests and local prejudices. That's a good thing, Wilson. We want local interests to be represented.
Well, his Hamiltonian side is popping out here.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, people, I get a little emotional when I read this. It pisses me off. The general government is not an assemblage of states, but of individuals for certain political purposes. It is not meant for the states, but for the individuals composing them. The individuals, therefore, not the states, ought to be representative in it. I could not disagree more, Wilson.
The purpose of this system is to be a voice for the union. The union of what? The union of people? No, the union of states.
Doug, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Which body created the Constitution? Was it the people or the states?
The states.
They're
delegates.
Which body ratified it?
The states.
And what is the only body that actually can repeal it?
The states. And then your Hamiltonians and today's hard left Hamiltonian-minded people say, but the people in the states are the same. There would be no states if there were no people.
They are different interests.
They don't recognize that the founders saw the states and the people as, in a sense, well, what's the right way of putting this? Unique and separate bodies. The states were a voting class, had its own rights, just like the people. You get to the Bill of Rights. The first 9 amendments are all about the people. But the 10th Amendment addresses states' rights. Why do you need states' rights if the states are nothing more than the people? Because the states were a body, an entity. They were considered an entity that also needed representation.
The people of Massachusetts do not have the exact same values as the people of South Carolina. They formed together to create their states. And each state has equal representation in government. That's really the difference there. Sorry, Wilson. He says a proportion of this representation can be preserved in the second, talking about the second branch of the legislature, as well as in the first branch.
And the second branch being the Senate, the first branch being the House, for those of you who have not kept up yet.
And what they're really talking about is, how do we name our senators? And the proposals out there that they should be named by the state legislature, which, of course, as we know, is what actually took effect when the Constitution was ratified up until 1913.
Well, and remember what I was saying earlier about having kind of this pseudo aristocracy, in the sense that you wanted the upper house, that's what Senate became known as, to be filled with people who are skilled in the politics, in the science of politics. The House may have a lot of newbies, might have some people who have been around for a while, but the senators, because they're appointed by the legislatures, these are people that have been around. They are trusted by the state legislature. And so it kind of puts in place a body of people who understand the system, understand how to operate, understands politics, understands, how to run committees and so on and so forth. And they felt that was an important component. So aside from the states having a voice in the legislature, it also allowed a pseudo aristocracy in the sense of a skilled class of political people. We did not want career politicians, but we did need people who were skilled in it.
Yeah, it served to put the brakes on the passions of populism, because the people's emotions have a tendency to have very high highs and very low lows. The Senate, being a more stable body, is supposed to basically temper those enthusiasms.
Well, that reminds us of the conversation between George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, when Thomas Jefferson came home from France after the Constitution had been written, and Jefferson read the Constitution on a foreign shore when he got home, and he asked George Washington, the system's amazing. I would have never thought of it myself, but I am curious about why you chose for the House to be the way it is, the Senate to be the way it is, where the House is of the people and the Senate is of the states. And George Washington said, well, it's sort of like that saucer and cup of tea you have. The cup of tea that's hot and steaming, that's the House. But you pour some of that tea into the saucer to cool it and then sip it from there. That's the Senate. And basically what he's saying is the House is a bunch of hotheads, but the Senate is where cooler heads prevail.
And what Wilson is trying to say is we want everyone to be hotheads. And so Wilson concludes, he says, and the election can be made by electors chosen by the people for that purpose. He moved an amendment to that effect, which was not seconded.
Nobody was willing to say, I'll do that. I'll take some of that. Not a person. That's hilarious.
Basically, he makes this long speech and gets crickets. Chirp, chirp.
The only person in the entire room that wasn't scratching his head with confusion was Hamilton. If Hamilton was there at that point. No, yeah, he still was. Yates and John Lansing had not taken off just yet, but we're getting close to that.
Okay, we've got a bit more to finish this day, and we're running over a little over an hour of recording right now, so I think we should probably call it quits. We should call it quits right about there. We got some more good speeches. This is a really fun show. I mean, we only got to a few speakers, but they're really important topics, and you and I got to pontificate on some of our favorite little rabbit holes, so that was enjoyable.
Yeah, and listeners, and this is really for you. If you stumbled upon this show and you went, oh, wow, that was interesting, go back to the beginning and check those ones out too. We've been going day by day. It'll take a while. Trust me, these are a lot of episodes, but it'll be well worth it for you to fully understand the evolution of this convention and these discussions. And the other thing is, and I cannot express this firmly enough, hit subscribe, hit notifications, and share this with your friends. Tell everybody you know that you found somebody who's actually talking about Madison's notes. I mean, the only time I've come across anybody doing this before was something called the Patriots Pub. And it was some friends of mine. One of them, he online went by Loki, Tim Curlin. And he's one of the greatest constitutional minds I've ever come across. He passed away while we were doing a show called The Founding Truth, where we went through a lot of constitutional concepts. And it's the only time Patriots Pub is the only time I've ever come across anybody going through the Madison's notes. And I feel like we are the successors of that. And I do believe that these episodes should be listened to by everybody who serves, everybody who's thinking about serving. It is so important when it comes to understanding the original intent. And I understand when we talk about original intent, we're going deeper than just what the words on the page of the Constitution mean, but the context that goes along with it. That's so important. So please share this link with all your friends. Put it in the email. Just make an email right now. Just do it. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you know when the next program's, because to be honest with you, we've been all over the place when it comes to when the next episode. We want to get more consistent, but Wednesdays, maybe Fridays, but just hit notifications. No worries. You'll be told when it's coming. Thank you for spending the time with us. We so appreciate it. And don't forget, Warhamster has other shows on his channel. This isn't the only one. Definitely watch these ones, but he's got so many other great things that he does. Get on social media with him. He is quite the active dude on social media. And of course, visit me at douglasvgibbs.com.
Very good. You know, I was just going to say, you know, we are taking this line by line, word by word through the, and I could very easily spend a day summarizing the important points and getting them more quick. But every single one of these speeches by these gentlemen, the founding fathers, these points need to be hammered home over and over again. So I think we're doing it the right way.
I think so. I think so. And I appreciate and understand, audience, while Patriots Pub is important to me, and I've always wanted to write a book about Madison's Notes, things like that, this was his idea. Warhamster said, "Hey, Doug, what do you think about, dude, what a great idea. You guys are the recipients of such a great idea. Please continue to visit us and really enjoying this."
And when we finally get done with this, we're going to go into the ratifying conventions.
Yeah.
Because that is some fascinating stuff. And you want to know.
And for those of you who are curious, read Virginia's for sure.
Maybe you could skip over New York's.
Well, New York's is interesting. Pennsylvania and Virginia and North Carolina, I think, are the three most important to read.
Yeah, without a doubt. I bring up New York because, again, we talked about Hamilton. I want to hammer this home once again because that's a dead horse we can't kick enough. I'm going to get a Hamilton like a dartboard and just sitting right in front of me.
Well, I'm usually shooting my guns. Maybe I'll get myself a... No, never mind. Go ahead.
Hamilton is arguing for
target practice.
Hamilton is arguing for a British mercantilist system, a much bigger government than anyone else there wanted. He doesn't get his way. So all of a sudden we get the convention, the Constitution. He's got to go back to New York and try to get them to ratify it. He has a vested interest in getting it ratified because he knows that that's bigger government. He'll be a part of it and he'll be able to.
It's not what he wants, but it's a step in that direction.
And so he wrote vociferously for almost a year, what are known as the Federalist Papers. And then he got Madison to help out there too.
Yeah, because everybody knew he was a nationalist and weren't listening to him. Says, well, if I get this other voice that people respect, maybe these essays will get a little further along. Interestingly enough, they wrote with pseudonyms and nobody truly knew. They had an idea based on the writing styles, but nobody truly knew who wrote what until after Hamilton died and he had a list in his desk.
Throughout, despite he didn't just die. Got shot.
Yeah, no, it took him 4 glorious days to die.
I'm not going there.
My mom hates it when I say it that way.
The point I wanted to bring home is after all those efforts by Hamilton, New York ratified the Constitution by 1 vote.
Yeah.
So
well, New York City was more the Federalist party, Hamiltonian mindset, should I say, and the rest of New York, as it is today, was the more Jeffersonian mindset and limited government and so on and so forth. And New York's that way today, because of democracy. New York City really dominates New York politics, but the rest of the state doesn't fall in line with what New York City says. And it was true then as it is today.
Very much so. And we can talk a little bit more about the corruption of New York politics actually began right around this exact time. Tammany Hall comes into existence shortly thereafter. Mm-hmm. That's enough for today. Doug, as always, thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. I love doing these programs.
I thought it was a lot of fun today. It's good to be back.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to be back in the saddle. Cheers, everyone.